Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our webinar entitled Whirlpool Corporation, Talent plus Culture equals Performance. I'm Jaren Hart, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager at Dennison Consulting. I'll be your host for today's webinar. We're really happy to have Mark Markram with us today from Whirlpool Corporation. And before we get started, I just wanted to quickly touch on some technical items. We'll plan to present for about 45 minutes, and then we'll use the remainder of our time to answer questions submitted by our audience. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a questions control panel that you can use to send in your questions. We ask that you please send these throughout the presentation rather than waiting until the end so that we can have some time here to organize them and make the most of our question and answer session. We will try to get through as many questions as we can, and we apologize in advance if we don't get to your specific question, but we'll make every effort to follow up with you after the webinar. I also wanted to let you know that a copy of today's webinar will be archived on our website if you'd like to view it again. We'll also send you an email with a link to the archived webinar after today's presentation. So why don't we get started? I'm really pleased to introduce you to our speaker, Mark Markram. Mark serves as the Human Resources Director of Talent and Organization Development for the Global Product Organization at Whirlpool Corporation. His work focuses on talent management, leadership development, and organizational competencies that enable the company to deliver global product leadership. Mark's experience in human resources spans 25 years, starting his career on the gold mines in South Africa, after which he joined Whirlpool Corporation. During his time with Whirlpool, Mark has mostly been involved in global HR roles, having lived and worked in South Africa, Italy, and the United States, including extensive travel in Asia, where he played a key part in the expansion of Whirlpool Corporation's global R&D footprint. Mark also works as a coach with individual leaders, executives, and teams on their development and team effectiveness. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Mark to get us started.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Jaren. Hello and welcome to everybody, and thank you for your time that you've taken to join us today to learn about an exciting tool called Culture Snapshot. Snapshot, as I'm going to call it, has been co-developed by Leader Onboarding and Dennison Consulting. Over the last year or so, we've been piloting Snapshot in support of our new Leader Onboarding efforts at Whirlpool. Whirlpool is a company that has been operating successfully for 100 years, and I'm really proud to be working in an HR organization where we are continuously providing innovative solutions that enable our business to deliver results. At Whirlpool, we have a vision to be in every home, everywhere, with pride, passion, and performance. And I want to share just a few facts with you about Whirlpool. We are the world's #1 major appliance company with more than $18 billion in revenue in 2011. We are truly global, with products sold in more than 130 countries around the world, enabled globally by 71,000 employees. We have 6 $1 billion brands, and hopefully you will recognize at least one of them and maybe have 1 or 2 in your own home. What is today's webinar all about? We're going to be talking about leadership development, and more specifically, our practices around supporting new leaders to come on board and be successful. It's in that context that we will share our experience with the Culture Snapshot tool and the role it plays in our onboarding process, along with the impact of using the tool. We're going to do a quick poll now. I'm going to invite all of you to participate. But before we go there, I do want to mention that it is our assumption that the majority of the folks on the call today are either internal practitioners in a company like I, or external practitioners consulting and supporting companies. We are actually curious about who uses an onboarding process, and once we get the results in, we'll share those with you. I just want to clarify that when we speak about onboarding, we are not referring to the administrative processes of getting computers and desks and signing paperwork and getting people onto payroll. We're really speaking about the interactive coach-supported process that we have designed, or you may have done so yourself, to get a new leader integrated into the organization quickly and effectively so that they can start delivering results quicker. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Jaren, who would administer the poll for us.
Great, thank you, Mark. We'll give everybody about 30 seconds to answer the poll, starting now. So as we wait for the responses to come in, I'll let you know there's about 75% response rate. We still have about 15 seconds. There's about 50% more, about 10 seconds left. If everybody wants to submit their answers in the last 5 seconds, and I think we'll look to wrap up the poll momentarily. So that's the end of the poll. It looks like, Mark, 47% of respondents said that they were an internal practitioner. 26% said that they were an internal practitioner not using the onboarding process. 11% were external practitioners who were using the onboarding process, and 15% were external practitioners not using the onboarding process. So back to you.
Great, thanks very much for that, Jaren. So, we've actually got a pretty good mix of internal and external practitioners, and a fairly good mix of people who actually do onboarding and use that as a practice, and those that don't. We find that onboarding is not necessarily a new concept per se, but I think actual practice in this area is fairly uncommon, we found, and where we do find it, it's fairly inconsistent as well. In slide 6, in a couple of slides' time, I'm going to be sharing more detail regarding our onboarding processes at Whirlpool with you, and hopefully you'll learn something about that. But first, I do want to talk about the bigger picture for leadership development at Whirlpool. In 2011, we were recognized by Fortune magazine and Aon Hewitt in their top 10 companies for leaders survey. This is an achievement that we are really very proud of. The top companies for leaders is the most comprehensive global research on leaders in the market, and they examine the link between leadership practices and financial results. At the end of the day, results is what it's all about. The conversation and the context of our conversation today is to discuss an onboarding tool that we strongly believe leads to better business results, and we believe we have evidence of that. Our work in supporting newly placed leaders was one of the driving factors that led us to receiving this recognition. You may be asking yourself at this point, why onboarding? Well, at Whirlpool, we certainly favor quality over quantity in our hiring process. We have a very robust interviewing process, and we do not hire until we believe our bar has been met. We'll sometimes keep a role open for quite some time before we find the right candidate. As such, the expectation on newly placed leaders is really very high, along with the speed that we expect them to learn about their new environment in order to start delivering results as quickly as possible. Needless to say, and I think you all might have experienced this, there is high risk in placing new leaders. Industry norms are that 50% or more will fail within 18 to 24 months of being in their new role. And for us, that is just an unacceptable statistic given the cost associated with recruitment and the potential cost of non-delivery. As such, that's why we have onboarding. It is really a risk management approach. But apart from just focusing on the negative side of risk management, there's huge upside relevant to a great talent coming on board and being successful and delivering results. In our process, we support leaders in a number of key areas. One is really supporting them with the relationship building process with key stakeholders. Stakeholders are really key to the new leader's success, and we support the new leader in identifying who they are, and we also support them in setting plans for timely engagement and information gathering. Really, knowledge development and acquisition is a systematic and focused process that we support them with. Responsiveness to feedback is key. We also launch a 360 survey called Level Set at the 60-day mark to identify any blind spots that the new leader might have. And we also set the appropriate action plans. You may be wondering why at the 60-day mark. And we find after 60 days of being in a new role, all the key stakeholders, that person's boss, the people in the team, already have opinions. They have data on how that new person is doing. But at 60 days, those opinions are not yet fairly set. We do a 360. That person receives feedback and is then able to put in place action plans to mitigate any blind spots before opinions are set. We found that to be very successful. And the whole process is supported by coaching, where we really see value in supporting the emotional roller coaster that comes with moving into a new role. Now I want to highlight the importance of culture in all of this. Our people vision at Whirlpool is great people and winning culture. A key piece for us was the introduction of culture into our vision in early 2010. We've always had a lot of focus being placed on the talent agenda, the great people part of our practice, in that we have very robust talent management practices that we are proud of. But actually something was missing, and that was really the culture piece. And at this point, I want you to imagine a gardener who spends a great amount of time and effort picking out the best seeds or strongest plants and then planting them in the garden. The same gardener spends time pruning and shaping the plant and even setting growth objectives, how quickly that gardener wants the plant to grow and deliver fruit maybe, but spends no time at all on the soil or actual environment that the plant has been planted. I'm guessing this is the reason why Miracle-Gro sells so well in the US. And this is the culture piece for us and why it is so important. I must add that we really started getting our own heads around the culture space and the impact it has on results through our work on leadership transitions. And here I make reference to the Dennison solutions highlighted on the bottom right of our screen. And at this point, I'm going to hand over again to Jaren, and we're going to be doing another poll.
Great, thank you, Mark. So at this time, we will take the same approach, ask you to take about 30 seconds to weigh in here. If you want to indicate your agreement with one of these statements, which is more important, we've got about 15 more seconds. So looks like we've got about 20% of votes in. We'll give it a couple more seconds. About 50% of you have voted. So we'll look to wrap this up in a moment. If you want to get your last vote in. And we'll look to wind this up now. So Mark, it looks like the top two choices were that 34% of people agree with increases ability to have sustainable impact more quickly, and 34% say creates a foundation for their team to take effective action. So we'll pass this back to you.
Thanks very much, Jaren. And you know, judging by the speed at which the selections came in, I'm guessing that it was probably quite difficult to choose. And in fact, our experience is that all four areas matter. The significance of each area, of course, will differ depending on the situation, but we have found them all to be applicable in the onboarding process. So in fact, there was no wrong answer there. Now I'm going to share with you a few of our own takeaways from using Snapshot. And I invite you to think back to when you started in a new role. How did you get to understand your role and your environment? How long were you given? And how long did it actually take you? I'm also going to ask you a question, and that is, what do you wish you had to speed up the process? What tools do you wish you might have had available to you in order to speed up that process? And I want you to think about this question in the context of arriving in a new city that you've never been in before. The first thing we tend to look for is a map of that city, and with that map in hand, we're able to start asking relevant questions. And just to speak about the map, we are going to have a more detailed review of the Dennison model in a few slides' time. Snapshot helps our leaders get more focused more quickly on the key issues that need addressing, as well as appreciating the areas that were strong and didn't need fixing. We're also proud to say that we are achieving in excess of a 90% retention rate for our newly hired executives, and that already indicates a huge return on our investment. Snapshot creates a common language, and a common language on culture is really useful. Again, I invite you to think back to when you were interviewing for a new role or interviewing a prospective candidate. In my experience, the question, "Tell me about the culture," always comes up. What are some of the answers you've heard? Well, I've heard things like, "Everybody is really nice around here," or "We're a relation-centric organization," or "It's important to get along in order to succeed." I'm sure you have many more examples, and in fact, if you've recently been interviewing for a new role and you've had 5 interviews in a day, you'll have probably got 5 different answers to that same question. So I want you to imagine if the consistent response was, from each person that you've interviewed with, "The team is clear on our vision and we have a strong strategy in place. We certainly need to improve clarity on goal setting, and we also tend to be internally focused and are pushing to understand the customer more. Recently, we've worked to break down silos within our organization, and we're actually using vision as our North Star to do that, so that we can reach agreement on issues easier and quicker than we used to." Imagine the power of having a tangible and consistent response to your question on culture. Imagine actually knowing what the culture is all about before you start in a new role, and having a good sense of where to begin. Imagine how much anxiety that takes out of the process. The point I want to make at this stage is that we are using the full culture survey in our global engineering organization to help us with their organizational transformation. Now to our case study. I have a great story for you about the impact Snapshot findings had on helping a new leader quickly understand her new reality and, as a result, increased sales volume in a global operation. We had a situation where the company was implementing a new outsourcing strategy aimed at driving an increase in high-margin product sales. We had the need for a role where the incumbent would build infrastructure and process discipline in an environment where these concepts were quite new. For this, we needed to hire an external leader with experience and expertise in an area where we didn't really have much experience internally. So we put a lot of effort into finding the right person and selling, once we'd found that person, the role and company in order to attract them. Anything about that sound familiar to you? Before debriefing the rest of the case study, however, I really want to go into a bit of explanation on the Dennison model itself. And here at Whirlpool, as our conversation around culture became more and more common, and questions like, "Gee, it doesn't feel very tangible," or "We're not actually sure what we mean by this word culture," we needed something that would help us with that question that was easy to understand and use, but was really robust and valid in respect to research and depth. I actually have found both in the Dennison model. The Dennison model answers 4 key questions about our organization. Top right is mission. do we know where we are going as an organization? Bottom left is involvement. Are our people aligned and engaged? Adaptability is top left of the picture. Are we listening to the marketplace? And then consistency, bottom right in yellow. Do we have the systems and processes in place to create leverage? It's about sustainability. Each of these 4 traits are further broken down into 3 indexes. So under mission we have vision. Do you actually know where you're going as a company? Is everybody clear on what the future looks like? And then, importantly, do we have a strategy in place to support the achievement of that vision? And then, of course, goals and objectives. Does everybody in the organization have goals and objectives that guide them and drive them in the short term to achieve and execute the strategy that ultimately drives to achieving the vision? On the adaptability side is customer focus. Do we know what the consumer wants and how to meet that need? And are we able to create the change and adapt appropriately in order to meet that consumer's need? And as we are doing that, are we learning from our successes and actually very importantly, are we actually learning from our failures? Are we a learning organization that we continuously build capability? And that takes me down to the bottom left quadrant where we have capability development. And as a result of our learning, do we continuously build capability that gives us a competitive advantage? Do we empower our people that are capable to take decisions and act on their own and add value? And do we bring people together? How strong is our team orientation? Consistency, core values, these help employees and leaders make decisions and set priorities. Really it provides a sort of backbone for the organization. And this allows them to reach agreement, and especially when difficult situations arise, the organization's ability to reach agreement and consensus and move forward quickly. And then ultimately how work flows. Coordination and integration is really critical for an organization to be successful. At this point I want you to think back to our gardener and imagine the 4 elements and 12 indices as key ingredients to creating a perfectly fertile environment for the strongest seeds and plants, for the talent that you've really been taking so much time to assess and to help them deliver results. You'll also notice that you can cut the model into hemispheres. On the left, a combination of adaptability and involvement make up the flexible side of the model. Organizations that are strong in these traits typically change quickly in response to their environment. They tend to be newer companies as well. On the right, mission and consistency make up the stable side. Stable organizations are typically very focused and predictable. They put in place structures that allow them to deliver sustainably over time. The model also splits by top and bottom. Adaptability and mission make up the external focus. Organizations that are strong in these 2 traits are focused on the outside environment. They typically have a good eye for the market and are able to adapt and change to the external environment. Whereas organizations that have a strong internal focus rate high in the involvement and consistency traits. Their focus is on the internal systems, processes, and people of the organization. Ultimately, there are dynamic tensions where opposite sides of the 4 traits coexist and complement each other. We would also see this if we were to look at the indices. For example, it would be ideal to have a high consumer focus that informs your vision and strategy. Imagine a vision and strategy without understanding what the customer really needs. You might end up going in a direction that's not relevant. Assuming you had a clear and inspiring vision in place with a strategy to support it, the ability for the people in the organization to change because they know the why of change becomes that much easier to influence. Interestingly, that if the creating change score is low, it's not to say that we should send all employees on a change management course because they don't know how to change. It may help possibly, but you probably find they don't know the why of change. That's the vision and the strategy. There's probably a huge amount of change taking place already. It just isn't linked to a clear vision of where that change will take place. The point I think I'm making here is that all of the different quadrants in the picture are important, and there are tensions, and each one feeds off the other. Now I'm going to specifically speak about how Culture Snapshot works. It is a tool with the same DNA as the Dennison culture model, and it has been developed to specifically support new leader transitions. Traditionally, we would deploy the survey in the first week or two of a new leader coming on board. But imagine the power of providing a new leader with a map of the city as they arrive, or even as you're going through the interview process. Right now, for us, that's an imagination. I would love to be doing it. We don't actually do it at this stage, but it's an idea. Snapshot surveys up to 35 raters from 6 rater groups, and the leader gets a comprehensive report designed to provide all the information they need when they need it. In addition to a comprehensive report, we found the levers for change to be a very valuable resource, in that when you identify the areas that need focus or attention, the levers for change resource provide a sort of playbook that guides you through the action planning process. We're now going to go back to our case study and show you the results of the survey. And I'm warning you, there's going to be quite an interesting eye picture. So I just want to refresh your memory on the scenario that I spoke to earlier. The situation with a new outsourcing strategy requiring a new role to build infrastructure and new process discipline, and obviously needing to go externally to bring a new leader on board. After taking the Culture Snapshot survey, this is the pictorial view that a new leader will have. And this picture was shared with the newly placed leader within the first 2 weeks of her joining the company. I'm going to take you through each of the 6 pictures, but I want to make a point that the scores you see now, they weren't in the description of the model earlier, are normative scores that are normed against a Denison database of 1,000 companies, plus minus 1,000 companies. So on the top left, you'll see 23 people, all responses took the survey. Then we have the results from the hiring manager, top middle, and the functional leadership team, top right. Important to note at this stage is that really the people doing the recruiting or the interviewing with the new leader were the hiring manager and the functional leadership team. And this gives an interesting picture of how they actually saw the organization and the culture of the organization. Bottom left is the picture that we got from the 8 peers to this leader. And in the middle, this organization certainly had a set of customers, and they would have been the regional group. And so this is how the customers saw the organization based on their interactions and delivery. My goodness, have a look at that picture on the bottom right. That is the picture and how the direct reports and the skip level reports that will be reporting into this new leader see the organization. I would guess that their world seems pretty ugly. As you start looking at this slide, what questions most readily come to your mind? Now I'm going to hand over to Jaren for our next poll. This is going to be our last poll. Jaren?
Great, thanks, Mark. We'll use the same process again here where everybody has about 30 seconds to respond. So please go ahead. And I also wanted to quickly remind everybody that if they had some questions for Mark at the end of the presentation, to please submit them during the remaining part of the presentation. Looks like we still have about 15 seconds left for the poll, so please shoot us your answers. We'll give it about 10 more seconds. There's been about 25% of the respondents voting. We're jumping up to 40%. So we'll look to wrap up the poll momentarily, and we'll go ahead and close it. So Mark, it looks like the top two choices were the first selection, stable versus innovative, and the final selection, do they get it done ugly? So I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks very much, Jaren. So I'm going to try and answer these two questions. Well, on the first one, stable versus innovative, which is more important for growth? And the reason why we ask this question is that the scores on the right half of the circumplex are higher than on the left half, indicating a culture of stability. And as we know, innovation is a combination of external focus and flexibility. Of course, the operation has an aggressive growth strategy. And the question is, where should they focus on strengthening the operation? What the leader did when she got this information, and since the operation requires innovation to grow, she really set about identifying the barriers that are standing in the way of creating and implementing new ideas, and enhancements were tackled directly. Actions also included clarifying the vision for the team and really setting applicable goals, addressing the organizational learning and team capability as well. Some new team members were brought on board, as well as sort of structural team development took place. Answering your question number 5, do they get it done ugly? Well, that's an indication that they're low in coordination and integration scores, low team orientation and empowerment, low creating change and organizational learning scores, all suggest that the team has to really muscle through its challenges, lacking process, teamwork, and a means of enhancing change or enacting change. And it's also likely that they need to tackle each initiative as a once-off. There's no real learning from successes or failures, and they don't benefit from experience to create sustainable process. Really what happened was the leader immediately needed to implement process discipline and really held all employees as well as contractors to those standards. And as a result of taking the actions with the team and also level setting with leadership and expectations, quality and performance really improved dramatically and actually very rapidly. Let's remind you about our people vision. Great people. We have a strong leader who we have spent significant time, effort, and resources to bring on board. The experiences are that she will quickly put, let me rephrase that, the expectations are that she will quickly put her experience and proven track record to work in order to deliver the results expected from the new strategy. And now for the culture piece of the vision. With the findings from Snapshot, our newly placed leader had the map of the new city, so to speak, in the form of a pictorial understanding of the culture. With the help of an onboarding coach, she was able to put in place an action plan that included identifying areas that needed the most attention, who she needed to have conversations with, and what those conversations should be about. She put a lot of effort focusing on the development of her team and bringing some additional skills on board, as well as renegotiated a key contract. Snapshot enabled all of this to take place in a few months versus a much longer period it would have taken to figure it all out on her own. The risk of letting a new leader figure it out on their own is huge, relevant to staff turnover, The time it takes to deliver results absolutely impacts the view on a new leader as a talent, and ultimately the lack of results delivery on its own. The outcome has been very encouraging and the results speak for themselves. We feel that our new leader, along with a business strategy, are off to a really good start. I also feel that we would be in a very different place if we had not have provided the support through leader onboarding and Culture Snapshot. With these results, the team was able to validate the new strategy and by doing so attracted continued support for the initiative to move forward. And that's really key, especially when we source, and there's a lot of competition for resources in our organization, and to attract the resources to allow this to move forward was a huge win for us. I do want to highlight the human side of onboarding. Of course there's risk to the company associated with a new person in a new role, but there's significant risk for the individual and the family. Often moving to a new company is associated with relocating family to a new world, a new environment, new schools. This in itself is traumatic, not to mention the trauma 12 months down the line when it's not really working out for the new person. How do we use Culture Snapshot? It is used specifically for new leader transitions. External hires, of course, but internal hires can hold as much risk as an external hire. When we have internal moves where leaders move into significantly larger roles or to other functions, regions, countries, or even continents, these moves are all candidates for the use of Culture Snapshot. The snapshot reports are delivered confidentially and anonymously by a qualified facilitator. A qualified facilitator will be well versed in the practice of onboarding, as well as having a robust working knowledge of the Dennison culture model itself. With that, we have really wrapped up the formal part of this presentation. And I'd like to hand over to Jaron, who's going to facilitate the question and answer session.
All right, great. Thank you, Mark. At this time, as Mark mentions, we're going to begin the question and answer portion of our webcast. We'll look to spend about 15 to 20 minutes here. If you do have a question, I'd like to remind you again to submit one if you haven't done so already in the questions control panel. We'll try to get through all of our questions today, but if for some reason we can't address yours, we'll plan to follow up with you after the webinar. We've already received several great questions, so why don't we just dive right in? Mark, there's been a lot of interest in the different feedback from the different stakeholders, especially when the boss's results are different from the direct reports. Can you shed some light on how you'd handle that conversation with the boss?
Yeah, so that's a very fair point. I must add that right at the beginning, when we start the onboarding process, the new leader plus the boss, as well as the team, are all aware of the process. When we launch Snapshot, we make them all aware of what the details of the survey. And the great thing is the information in the survey is what the boss, which each constituent answers. So as such, the new leader can go and have a very constructive, data-based conversation, and it allows a very safe space to have that conversation with the boss, because after all, the data is what the boss provided and what the rest of the constituents provided. So our experience was that better than the new leader trying to have a conversation both based on his or her perceptions after a couple of weeks or a couple of months, they use the sort of data support to support that conversation, and it really makes a big difference.
Great, thank you, Mark. We have another really interesting question from James, who writes, often people feel overwhelmed in a new position and companies give them 2 to 4 weeks to get their feet on the ground just learning the mechanics of the position. How is Culture Snapshot information integrated into the early onboarding period so that it doesn't overwhelm the new leader to the organization? Can you share some thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to answer it in two parts. One is part of the actual onboarding process is to support the new leader in the structured process of onboarding information, as well as the key stakeholders who that person needs to engage with. The second part of the answer is Snapshot itself has a huge amount of data, and the coach will walk through the reports in a way that highlights the important pieces for the new leader and lets that person be a lot more focused. So a combination of just the stakeholder analysis and the process of getting information there and Snapshot allows it to be much more focused as opposed to just getting data and information from everywhere. The other part of that is I do want to say that Snapshot is in the context of a whole onboarding process, and that's why the coach support is really useful for at least the first 4 to 6 months.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like we have another great question from Richard, who writes, how do you use Snapshot with external consultants? How does it help them operate better? And Mark, we know that you worked with Leader Onboarding to administer and use the Culture Snapshot, so can you share how you worked with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Leader Onboarding have been doing onboarding itself, I'm sure it's 15 if not more years, and they've got experience and a good track record in the actual onboarding space. Again, there is the number of elements that I spoke of earlier. So in our case, we have a combination where we use an external consultant, that's Leader Onboarding, as well as our internally trained onboarding consultants, if you like, or internal practitioners to support new leaders at different levels of the organization. Each new hire has its own level of complexity that will determine whether we use an external consultant who are real experts with deep knowledge in that area, or whether we'll use our internal practitioners. I believe, if you're an external consultant already supporting organizations with leader development or organizational transformation, as well as onboarding or the practice of onboarding, Snapshot is an additional tool that wasn't really available before we started piloting it right up front, right at the earliest possible time you can use it in the process of a new person coming on board, and that's the tool that fills that gap.
Great, thank you, Mark. So Michael has a question. He's asking, did Whirlpool Corporation use leadership assessments in addition to the organizational culture assessment? And if so, how was it done? What benefits did you find, and what challenges did you overcome?
Yeah, great question. The first answer is no. At this stage, we don't use any formal leadership assessments in our recruitment process. We have a very robust interviewing process, and in fact in the onboarding, part of the onboarding process, we do get feedback and intelligence from the interview process that we use with the new leader to support the new leader with understanding possible gaps that might have been picked up in the interviewing process and highlighting those as areas to work on.
Wonderful, thanks. The questions are starting to roll in. We have another great question from Dawn, who's asking, has the company formally articulated the desired future state culture? In other words, is the blue quadrant where they are moving overall, or a little of each quadrant?
Good question. So this is probably less about Culture Snapshot itself and more about culture overall, and it's actually sometimes quite difficult to keep, well, not to blur, where, sort of snapshot for a new leader and that person's immediate organization with a broader organizational culture survey. but probably the same approach applies whether you're doing a small culture snapshot or an overall organizational survey, in the sense that there is a bit of a flow. If you get a picture where mission is not clear, the red quadrant, the mission part, influences practically every other element. It influences, customer focus will influence the mission, but ultimately having a clear mission influences the ability of the organization to change. So we'll put in place the red first, focus there, and then start looking at how the rest falls into place. And it falls into place intentionally. Once you got your vision and your mission, you start addressing the rest of it. One of our areas is around organizational learning, and that translating into capability development. The other big area, I'm sure all companies have issues with silos and functional silos. That's where the mission, the vision, and the strategy is really key in helping organizations or cross-functional teams to reach agreement and coordinate and integrate, because if nobody on the team is really clear about where they're going and what the ultimate objectives are, it's always very difficult to reach agreement. But if you're all sitting there having a conversation about which way is the best way and should we do this or should we do that, you can always go back to, so what is our vision, what is our mission, can we really all align on that? Yeah, okay, let's go back to the conversation about what we need to do. So that starts driving an improved sort of ability to reach agreement and coordinate work.
Great, thank you. We have an interesting question from Darlene. Darlene wonders, who has accountability for leader onboarding? Is it the hiring manager? Is it HR? What are your thoughts on this one, Mark?
Okay, that's a great question. There's two parts to it. One, at our company, between the HR organization, we'll decide through a risk assessment whether we should do onboarding. And typically, if we are having any sort of executive placement, either external or internally, our HR organization will decide that that person requires support or not. If we've now made the decision to go into the onboarding process and support a new leader with onboarding, ultimately the supervisor or that person's manager, boss, whatever you want to call it, is accountable for the success of the new leader. And it's a joint accountability. The boss, the new leader, the key stakeholders, members of the team, through the process as the onboarding coach, we actually hold all stakeholders accountable relevant to their own roles. And actually that's really important to do, because often a new leader might come into an organization and it would seem to them and even to others that they're the only person accountable for their own success. And that's where it starts becoming, because, of course you've hired this great external talent who apparently has all the answers and is a lot better at doing whatever they're expected to do than anybody internally could do. So, this sort of knight in shining armor view of a new external hire has a lot of flaws to it, especially if nobody else takes the accountability for them to be successful.
Thanks, Mark. We have another question from Janelle, who would love your input on how to successfully integrate a new executive into the culture without sacrificing their own identity. She writes that so often we want them to become one of us that we don't appreciate we have hired them to bring a different vantage point. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, great question. So, I'm just gathering my thoughts here. Where onboarding is really useful, especially with the 360 survey after 60 days, is we don't necessarily want the new person to come on board and become like us. What we do want is for that new person to come on board, respect what's already in place, bring new ideas, But there's a big balancing act in terms of, do they really approach the people that are in the organization in a way that's going to be impactful? I can talk about, are they going to be patient enough versus this need to demonstrate worth and become productive? Often a new leader who's been told, you're a change agent, you need to come in and shake things up. That's probably the most dangerous thing you can ask a new person to do, especially if they don't know how to do it. They think it is all about making improvements and implementing change and demonstrating competence and being decisive. But there's the other side of the coin. You need to do it in the right way. A little bit like a heart transplant, where it is a foreign body, but if all the work is done in the right way to make sure there is a compatibility, but secondly, the time is taken for that heart to start operating effectively with all the other organs that are required to be on board for it to be effective, if I can use that as a metaphor, that's really the benefit of onboarding, is helping that new leader, executive with great new ideas who's expected to be the change agent to come and do it in a way that's going to be effective and successful. And that's not about changing who they are, but how they go about doing what they're expected to do. Hope that wasn't too long-winded.
Oh, wonderful, Mark. So we have another great question. This one comes from Keisha, and understanding that the Culture Snapshot is a new tool without specific research on it, although it is based on the Dennison model, which is backed by years of research. We're wondering if you could share your input on how the Culture Snapshot impacts performance based off of your experience with it.
Sorry, Joan, could you just repeat that question for me?
The question was asking about the impact on performance that Culture Snapshot has, although because it's a new product and it's not rooted in years of research like the Dennison model and surveys are. So we were wondering what your take on that was with your use of the tool, how you see it impacting performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So as the snapshot model uses exactly the same DNA as the Dennison model. The questions that are in there, although they are less questions, are the same questions that you find in the overall Dennison model. So the years of research and tried performance, if you like, as well as their research in terms of how it impacts performance, is valid for Snapshot as it is valid for the full culture survey itself. Now, of course, one needs to say, well, that's fine. Does it actually apply? In our experience, and I just shared with you one case study, but in our experience, absolutely, in the context of onboarding, it links directly to results based on the speed, the ability to navigate the organization, the ability to have the right conversations as right up front versus 6 months later once you figured it all out. That in itself delivers results. If after that you still want to look at the broader organization because you think there is an opportunity to improve the performance climate, if you like, that's another word for culture, performance climate of the organization, then absolutely do a full survey, which would then start you on the path of a more comprehensive culture change effort or initiative.
All right, great. Thank you, Mark. It looks like we have time for one more question before we begin to wrap things up. So the last question from one of our participants is, you said you were using the full Denison survey in one area of the business. Why did you choose a full survey instead of the snapshot?
Snapshot is for leader transitions only. In fact, we did do a snapshot with this new leader when he came on board to help him with his transition, but very quickly the new leader realized that he would like to do a lot more work in the culture space relevant to the broader need for a transformation in the organization. The group that we are working with is 4,500 people globally. Snapshot is not designed for that. That's where we'd absolutely be using the full survey, and we're doing that, you know, as an add-on, sort of a post-leader transition.
All right, wonderful. Well, at this point, I guess we're going to wrap up for today. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed Mark's presentation. The recorded version of the webinar will be posted onto our website, and we'll also email it to you directly following this. I'd also like to invite you to join us for our next webinar, which is scheduled for May 31st. It will feature Dan Dennison, the founder of Dennison Consulting, who will look to discuss key learnings from his newest book, Leading Culture Change in Global Organizations. I encourage you to visit our website for more details and to register if you're interested. Also, as you can see on the slide that's up right now, we'll be offering qualification sessions on the overall Culture Snapshot onboarding process. If you're interested in attending one or learning more, please visit the website that we have listed there. As always, if you're interested in learning more about the onboarding process or Dennison solutions for leader transitions, you can look at our website at www.dennisonconsulting.com. And again, the presentation will be posted there shortly. We'll send that to you via email, and thank you everybody for attending.